but we'll also edit this. So then
Okay.
we'll down
Okay.
to
I'm fully expecting a dog bark or somebody to come through the door. I'm going to do my best, but I apologize in advance.
yeah, it's always the hope. We spent all last year online, and whenever things went wrong, it was like the best part of the experience. So
Well, I'll apologize in advance. I'm in a temporary apartment in Austin, Texas with the worst neighbors. You could not make these neighbors up. You'll probably hear them.
Oh, me.
well, I'm in my office at school, so there's going to be tons of noise, probably just people walking by all as well.
Okay,
So
so we're all in the same.
Yeah.
we're all in the same. We're all in it together.
Okay.
So when does your book come out, Megan? On 22nd? Is that right?
That's a great question. I think it's the 30th or the 31st.
30th.
I've been taking a kind of, to use a Southern expression, like let Jesus take the wheel feeling about it. I had a long space between book 2 and book 3, so I'm just happy. I'm just happy that book 3 is here.
Right. Kind of put a blind spot on it. Like,
Yep.
nice.
Good enough. So yeah, but I've actually been really happy with reviews and the way things are going. So I guess that's the trick, is to care less and things go better.
Absolutely. Well, are you going to be reading from that, I'm assuming, today?
I will, for the first time. So
Oh, really?
Maiden voyage.
Writings.
Okay, so well, I assume some people will be joining us throughout the hour. I know we're in between hours at our school, so people kind of dip in and dip out throughout the hour. But we're glad to have you in any capacity. So today, I just want to thank everybody for joining us for this is our third reading of the semester for the Celebration of Literary Arts through Des Moines Area Community College. This is our 20th year with this reading series, and right now we're doing it online again like we did last year, and I think we have right now 20 writers scheduled this spring. So the schedule, I'll put the site up, the link up at the end of the hour, and you have a chance to see who else is coming and you have a chance to register. And if you go to that site, you'll also see the videos, recordings from the previous readings as well as future readings. So check those out if you get a chance to. And even if you have to take off early today, it's always great to see what you missed. If you had to leave early and maybe share with friends and family, we'd be happy to have that out in the world. But today, we're going to be having two amazing writers. We'll have the amazing Amy Hempel and Maggie Mayhew Bergerman, who will be sharing their work with us in a moment. Two of my faves, as somebody says in the chat already, which is what I was going to talk about next. We have an interactive chat, and since nobody likes to read into the void of Zoom, I always recommend having people interact and call things out that they like about the reading, or ask questions or anything that you want to say, so that the readers they know that you're out there. But we also have a Q&A Dropbox. So anytime you have a question for the writers, just go ahead and drop it into the Q&A, and I'll make sure to get to as many as we can at the end of the hour. We'll begin the hour, though, talking about some introductions, and we'll have a little conversation about their latest work. And then they'll each read for about 10 or 15 minutes before we bring you guys back in for the Q&A. So without any further ado, I'll start off by introducing Amy Hempel, who is the recipient of awards from the Guggenheim Foundation, the United States Artists Foundation, and the Academy of Arts and Letters. Amy Hempel is the author of Reasons to Live, At the Gates of the Animal Kingdom, Tumble Home, and The Dog of the Marriage, and is co-editor of Unleashed. Her stories have appeared in Harper's, GQ, Vanity Fair, and many other publications, and it's been anthologized in Best American Short Stories, the Norton Anthology of Short Fiction, and her collected stories was named the New York Times as one of the 10 best books of 2007, and it won the Ambassador Award for Best Fiction of the Year. In 2008, she received the ERA Award for the short story, and in 2009, she received the PEN/Malamud Award for Excellence in the Short Story. She has a BA in journalism from San Jose State University and has taught at Sarah Lawrence, the New School, Duke, Princeton, and Harvard. And I believe she currently teaches at the Michener Center, and she has taught at Bennington MFA program in the past as well. She'll be joined by Megan Mayhew Bergman, who is the author of 3 books, Birds of a Lesser Paradise, Almost Famous Women, How Strange a Season, forthcoming in this month, actually in a few weeks. She is currently writing a book on the International Sweethearts of Rhythm, also with Scribner. She is a journalist, essayist, and critic. She has written columns on climate change and the natural world for The Guardian and the Paris Review. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, New Yorker, Tin House, Plowshares, Oxford American, as well as other publications. Her short fiction has appeared in Best American Short Stories 2011 and 2015 and NPR's Selected Shorts. She was awarded the Garrett Award for Fiction and the Phil Reed Environmentalist Writing Award for Journalism, and previously fellowships at the Bread Loaf Writers Conference and American Library in Paris. She currently teaches literature and environmental writing at Middlebury College, where she also serves as director of the Bread Loaf Entertainment Writers Conference. So thank you so much for joining us today. That was a mouthful, but maybe we can start by hearing your voices as opposed to just mine. And we can start off thinking about beginnings, I guess. And many of our students at the community college are just starting their path down the creative writing field, and they're just wondering about how do you get started and trying to make that vital decision about what to do with their lives. So I was curious about how you guys got started and when you decided you wanted to be a writer, and maybe you can just kind of give us a little bit of information about your beginning. Amy, would you like to start us off maybe?
Sure. I often say it was a default choice. It's not entirely accurate, but I believe Megan knows that I really wanted to be a veterinarian, and Megan is married to a veterinarian and understands well what a good veterinarian does and is like. And I was persuaded persuasively off that path by organic chemistry and other things like it. So I have made animals a part of my life in a number of other ways, always. The writing part came from reading, as I think it often does, for a lot of writers. My parents were great readers. There were gazillions of books around. I picked them up, I read them, and often ones I didn't understand that were beyond me. But really, I think sometimes, you want to do the thing that makes you cry or that laugh or the thing that unglues you. And I have a younger brother who was an amazing dancer, for example, and I would see him on stage as a teenager, and he would make me cry. It was so moving. But there's no way in the world I could move somebody by dancing. Quite the opposite. And same with singing, the other arts, photography. Not really, can't. Writing, I had a chance, and I loved language, and I just loved it more and more the more I read, and that's where I felt at home.
Megan, did you have a similar experience?
I think mine possibly, and this may be because of my Southern lineage, and it's more of an outgrowth of an oral tradition, I think. A lot of time in Southern Baptist church, listening to sermons, and my father is actually a great Southern storyteller. Hi, Mom and Dad. I think I saw you and you're here. So, but when my dad tells a story at the dinner table, there's that idea Nabokov expressed, the detail, the divine detail. My dad has sort of a knack for that, and so he'd be describing a drunk uncle on a bicycle, and he would know just when to pause and to say that the uncle had calf muscles like Lance Armstrong, and these animating details, and this, I think what Amy was referring to, looking at her brother, this way of making people laugh or engaging people, connecting, that sort of thing. So I think my desire to be a storyteller comes from that. And I think my earliest efforts were very much recycling things that I knew from him, from church. And I remember the first time I read Flannery O'Connor and Eudora Welty, some of which I read with Amy, which is probably a nice segue to the fact that Amy was my most beloved and important teacher when I was early in my writing career, all of us at Bennington used to truly fight and elbow and bribe and do anything we could do to end up in Amy's workshop. And I was
Thank
not
you,
immune to that.
Megan.
So
Thank you.
yeah, good teachers make a big difference.
That's awesome.
Um,
Go ahead, Amy.
no, I just I wanted to thank Megan, and it's I mean, what is more thrilling than watching someone you worked with in one capacity move along and go past you. It's just the best. It's the best. Yeah, yeah, it's the best.
Speaking of teaching, then I was curious about maybe you can talk to us a little bit about advice that you have for young writers, and most of them are often, well, as all of us are, I guess, it's like thinking about product and final versions of things. But of course, you have to get through the process first. And I was curious if you could talk to us a little bit about your own writing process, or what you teach your own students, for both of you, when it comes to writing process, how to get over writer's block or any kind of challenges that you run into. Can you describe your process to us a little bit, Amy?
I'll tell you, the way I can answer that as of today is I don't know how to write anymore. But what that means is I'm finding a new way to write. Okay. I take a long time between collections when I know I'm not even trying. And shortly after I turned in my most recent book, the world changed with COVID and the pandemic, and everything changed. And I know many writers who couldn't write, but I wasn't writing, but I hadn't planned to be writing. And recently, somebody was asking me, well, when do you think you'll start writing again? And I was thinking, beats me. I don't, as I said, I don't know how to write. But sometimes I felt like I don't know how to teach anymore, though I've taught for almost 40 years. And I know that means, oh, I'm finding a new way to teach. Mm. So I have to remember to translate that feeling of, I don't know how, into what it really is. Which is I'm finding a new way. I will tell you that reading the right things at the right time helps me, and I'm going to hold up the book I'm just about finishing. Given what we're seeing in Ukraine, I thought it was a good time to read the Marguerite Duras memoir, The War. And given how many times I've read The Lover, it's amazing to me that I somehow missed this. I just never read The War, and I certainly recommend it. This is World War II, of course, that she's writing about. And it's so good as to be disabling to another writer, but it brings something to the coverage we're seeing of the current horrors in Ukraine. And I got off of the question, so maybe it's time to let Megan have a word.
I love that idea of, like, the self-doubt that you often have as a writer or a teacher or whatever your occupation is, but really it's a moment of like growth as opposed to like.
Can be.
Yeah, I love that. Megan, do you have some advice or some thoughts on process?
I mean, I relate to everything Amy said, the sense of the before times and the after times, the kind of demarcations culturally, health-wise, the market, and the way, art responds to the contemporary moment. I mean, all of those things feel fraught. And I think, so I have a big space between book 2 and book 3. Some of that is learning, some of that is raising kids, some of that's working full time, some of that's self-sabotage, some of that's listening maybe to voices other than my own and trying to reconcile that with art making, which can be really difficult. I think for me, the best process point has been to pay attention to the thought quality behind my work and to be real with myself about how to spend myself. I think in some of the earlier years, there's so many things you can do as a writer. you could write criticism, you could teach, you could, there's just a lot of ways. And I think the years that I lost myself and lost my way and lost my connection to the work, um, I've had to do things to find my way back. And part of that is paying better attention to the things that matter to me and that spark a strong response in me, whether it's anger or passion or emotion, and just staying connected to the things that used to bring me to the page in the first place. Amy was always great at doing the thing that she was describing, which is sort of matching books for the moment. For me as a student, that was, things she could probably see me attempting to do in my work and knowing how to match a book where I could observe technique or idea. I remember, Amy, you suggesting Emerson's essays to me at one point, which ended up being really formative in lots of ways.
Great.
Mary Gateskill, Lori Moore. I've got a lot of Amy recommendations actually behind my head. But I do think, reading can do a lot in terms of process. Living can do a lot. So I find when I've had big spaces in my work, I'm often undergoing some revolution of being, which translates to a different sensibility in my work. But that's me trying to make the most of a big space between book 2 and book 3. But I think there was good reason for that.
Well, we also have Grace Paley as a model, who I think took 11 years between her second and third book, 10 or 11. I took 11 years between the second and third. So what?
That's the most inspiring thing I've heard. Thank you.
And also, Mark, I realized the writing I've done has been on my body. In the last couple of years, there's more on my leg, but I took a line from Horace. Not that I sit around reading Horace every day, but
sounds good.
But there's a line from a poem of his, and I put it. I had it. I didn't do it, obviously. I had someone tattoo this across my arm in Latin. It says, "Non omnis moriar, not all of me dies."
That's very permanent kind of writing.
Well, I think I was thinking about it. A dear friend I lost a couple of years ago was for her. And also, it's true. Not all of us dies. Some of us leave children. Some of us leave books, buildings, paintings, friendships, whatever. So that's the writing I've done. It's been on my arm.
Right. Well, I was curious, maybe one more question before we get to the reading is that you were talking about these spaces in between your books and between these projects. And so I'm kind of curious about, like you were saying earlier, about like finding a new way to write and growth. And I was kind of curious, both of your careers, how things have changed from your earlier work to what you're doing now, and how your style's changed, or maybe your approach to what questions you're asking has changed. Can you talk just a little bit about trajectory, I guess, and not just the process of individual projects, maybe? Maybe we can begin with even Megan, how over the course of these 3 books, how your voice has changed.
Sure. Birds of a Lesser Paradise was my grad school thesis. Amy's imprint is in that book significantly, and thankfully so. That's a really raw and honest book. There's a lot of vulnerability in that book. I think someone told me once, you never write as bravely as you do in your first book, because I'd never had the experience of being read widely or facing a critique or, the market. So that book is so unguarded that it's almost painful for me to read it sometimes. Almost Famous Women was written, I always write books like right on the brink of desperation. Like that's why I always tell students when they're saying, I want to wait until the time is right, or I want to wait until, there is never, Amy, I don't know if you've experienced this, but I've never had the right time come along.
Never.
So I tend to write my best books when I'm just really floored and on my knees. So all 3 have come from that place, which I won't describe in too much detail, but Almost Famous Women was an angry book in some ways. It was a book of thinking about how women build their lives, how they might choose to curate an unusual life at great cost, the sort of idealism, the cost of idealism. And then How Strange a Season is think it's my best book. I hope I've grown as a writer. I'm more suspicious of decoration now, I know.
Nicely
And
put. I like that. Yeah.
yeah. At times I worry I've even gotten too plain, but clarity matters so much to me now. I mean, it's not that I'm not okay with a little mystery or, letting the reader do a lot of work, but maybe just my own individual clarity with what I'm doing or writing toward, or clarity of sentence even. But yeah, I can't stop thinking about the natural world. I can't stop thinking about suffering. So I wake up every day and that's what I'm thinking about. And so I know that's coming to the page.
Awesome.
All
Maybe
right.
you have like a similar trajectory in terms of your voice changing.
Well, I just want to say that that's how I wake up too. That's the way I wake up. That is what's consuming me before I can even get coffee, and very much aligned with what Megan just said. And I also wanted to say something about what Megan said, what you said about the first book being just so, I don't know if you said raw or what the word you used, but it's sometimes hard to even read it later. But see, that's what I strive for, is exactly that. And the person I studied with many years ago said something that really, really stayed with me. He says, he said, wear your heart on the page and a reader will read to find out how you solved being alive. Mm-hmm. And I still think of that when I'm doing something. And I also, in terms of trajectory, I think of a couple of things, and I think more and more about purpose, as in, what is my purpose, just as a person in this world who is sickened and terrified by what's happening to the planet, and so many of us are. And I think, well, what can I do today? What can I do today? What can I do in person, on the page? What can I do? And so purpose, and just and where activism, where your passionate beliefs might intersect in a non-didactic way with your prose. And again, I go to Grace Paley, who was a very active anti-war activist, and it wasn't in all of her work by any means. And I didn't find it didactic when it was. But I think writing, in terms of any writing advice, I might give, it's like, have other passions, not because you need to write about them necessarily. It can be entirely separate, but they might well enter your journalism or your fiction, and that might be a very good thing.
I want to respond to that because Amy saved my life on this front. You probably gave me a couple of years of a head start with a piece of advice you gave in a workshop. We were with David Gates, and Amy and David had this excellent dynamic. We were all furiously scribbling everything they said. It was very like sharp and finely polished. And I'd written some earnest story. And I think, Amy, your nice, really generous way of addressing that was something along the lines of, avoid big idea words like mercy and love, and story has to come in front of idea, so that the readers will digest. And I use that in my fiction. I use that in journalism, this idea of, readers don't want to be hit with righteousness. No one really likes a manifesto. And I think my early setting was a little bit tilted toward manifesto, and that, that piece of feedback just was so useful to me. So
the dynamic of which Megan speaks, that David Gates and I had going in the workshops was, I believe, known as bad cop, bad cop.
Yes, that sounds right. Very useful.
Well, Amy, would you like to share some of your work with us, and for the next 10 or 15 minutes?
Absolutely. And I'm doing something a little different because I'm reading nonfiction. It's a very short personal essay. When my last book came out, Vogue magazine asked, they have a column, a regular column called Nostalgia. And they asked if I might have something to say about any kind of nostalgic feelings I might have. And I knew right away, and this does play into the natural world and a lot of, this was largely the way I found my place in it, or my favorite place in it. I don't do a lot of writing prompts, but one I do is sometimes to write about or write from the place in the world you feel most yourself, least extraneous, least self-conscious, and has to do with that. Okay. This is a quote. It opens with a quote. Yesterday's pond water braided, still wet in my hair. These lines from a poem by Jane Hirschfield made me cry when I heard them years ago. In just 9 words, she had summed up the happiest times of my childhood. Once I had discovered, as I put it in a story I would write decades later, that water was going to be my place on earth. There was a single pond in the suburb outside of Chicago where my family lived in 1963 when I was 11 years old, and where we remained for another 3 years. When I swam there that first year, a song ran constantly in my head, so it was not silence or mindlessness that I was after. It was Hello, Stranger, a summer hit by Barbara Lewis. When she sang the line, seems like a mighty long time, I felt both held and transported. One end of this pond, the end farthest from the small sand beach, funneled beneath a low short bridge. Under the bridge lived a community of crayfish. I never saw anyone disturb them by fishing or dipping a net. I would tread water near the crayfish while a lifeguard gave swimming lessons to young children some mornings in the shallow end. Or I would swim below the large flat rock that served as a diving platform near the largest of the overhanging willows, where the water was too deep for the little kids to swim. In the deep water were the haunting cold spots, especially before a thunderstorm broke. There are scientific explanations for these unnerving pockets of cold: thermoclines, the Coriolis force, stratification, Ekman spirals, seiches, but I did not know any of that at the time. I just thought they were ghosty. In a no-frills, serviceable one-piece bathing suit, I remember looking at my body underwater, the algae and pond weeds blurring irregularities, trying to gauge where on a continuum of girls I might reasonably place myself. I had a sense, though it was not yet pressing, that boys were going to place me on this continuum, and I was trying to second guess them. Idle projection. Alone in the clouded water, I never felt I should be doing anything else, never felt I should be anywhere else. This was the attendant, profound draw of the pond. Feeling so at home in water would not ever land me on a swim team. I had neither skill nor speed, nor could I do the butterfly or a decent Australian crawl. There was nothing competitive about being in water for me. I just needed to feel amphibious and hide while barely moving in an element other than air, legs finned by fish. Odd kinds of movement were subtly rewarded. Turning rapidly from one direction to another, say, or flipping underwater in a slow motion somersault it took a while for long hair to catch up to. My eyes were always open. It was helpful to see a kicking figure splash towards me, a friend or stranger, so as to greet or avoid, depending on what the moment called for. That need to hide was not an abstract impulse. I felt it as necessary, though at the time I did not realize why this was so. I saw that life at home went more smoothly the more time I spent underwater, out of sight. The following year, when I was 12, I would sometimes sneak out at night to pedal a 3-speed bike with crepe paper streamers wound through the spokes of the wheels to get to the pond and sneak onto the property against regulations. It conjured the kind of thrill I would later feel in high school when a guy flirted with me by gluing shark's teeth around the edges of a letter with the single sentence, "Let's go swimming at night." I have no recollection of entering or climbing out of the pond. In memory, I am always some distance from shore beyond the single metal raft. There was sometimes a transistor radio playing on the small beach or a family conversation I could not quite hear at a picnic table under the nearby oaks. My mother would sometimes read an art book or a novel on a towel on shore, and photos show my brothers digging in the sand with plastic shovels. They liked, but did not rely on the water as I did. My father was often away on business. One brother and I took music lessons. We visited the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago and played with our enormous black lab. I had a hilarious best friend who would later turn up in my stories, but there was escalating tension with my mother, and in a few years we could no longer occupy the same house. I would leave her boarding school, a happy banishment. I still see friends from that time, but it was not a choice. Kept secret from me was the fact that I was the child from my mother's brief first marriage. And the summer when I was 11, and more so the following year, I began to look like my biological father. I would not learn this until after she died when I was 18. The neighborhood kids knew which mother on the beach was getting divorced. We knew that one of the boys who took morning swimming lessons had a sister who had been raped and stayed at home. But I did not know that my mother had had another husband. She was the most private person I've ever known. In the pond, I did not have to account for myself to her, and this division of activities suited her every bit as much as it served me. Reading got me through the 3 other seasons until I could reclaim my place beneath the pond's overhanging willows. At 12, the songs in my head in the pond were Dusty Springfield's Wishin' and Hopin', Leslie Gore's relatively badass You Don't Own Me, and Garnett Mim's Cry Baby, the song that introduced me to Heart Wreck and Longing with the prescient line, "Memories don't leave like people do." I got all I wanted from water, never needing to swim better than I did. I still do my best thinking at the bottom of a pond or pool or while dodging jellyfish off the coast of Long Island in August, the 1 month the ocean feels warm. I've rarely written a story that did not rely for part of its impact on water. I recognized this even though a reader would not. There is the story that came to me when my dog leaped out of our canoe so that it tipped over and we swam shoulder to shore. There is the story that came from getting caught in a riptide, making notes after knowing to swim parallel to shore to get free. After my mother died, when the family was living in San Francisco, a copy of Who's Who in the West arrived at the house. I was home alone at the time and looked up the names under H. There was my father, because of the communications business he was a part of in nearby Menlo Park. I read the brief biography, which included a typo, I thought. It had him marrying my mother 2 years after I was born. When I asked my father that night about the typo, he told me the story I should have been told as a child. Who's, my brothers retitled the volume. Hiraeth. It is a Welsh word defined as the longing for a place one cannot return to or a home one never had. It is the feeling that overtook me when I heard, shortly after this discovery, that the pond in the suburb of Chicago had been filled in by developers. I have not returned to see for myself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. Megan, would you like to share your work with us?
Sure. I've missed that feeling of being hypnotized when Amy reads. I mean, that was such a part of my education in writing and reading and listening at Bennington. So I spent, I don't know, a handful of years listening, and I haven't had that experience in a while, and it's important to me. So thank you, Amy. That was beautiful.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you so much.
I'm going to read for the first time from my book, How Strange a Season, that comes out at the end of the month. I thought I would read from the novella at the end, which is called Indigo Run. Never read from it in public before, so this is a first. It starts off with a quote from the poet Mina Loy. Women must destroy in themselves the desire to be loved. 1752. By noon, the ocean surged into the city. Pines arced dangerously in the wind and snapped. Waves crashed into the general store, claiming ledgers and bursting swollen sacks of flour. Schooners broke anchor and sailed onto East Bay Street. Winds brought down the gallows with 8 asphyxiated pirates still decomposing in the public square, eye sockets eaten away and teeming with larvae. A group of men rode a detached roof down the swirling brown tidal river, reaching for branches, hoping to reach marsh or solid ground. Marlon Glass was one of them. He felt certain that his young wife and son were dead, and that he would soon join them. He'd watched as the water took them away, watched as they clung to one another in desperation, flailing, drowning each other. He looked at the other men alongside him. He reached out in vain as his stable hand slipped from the roof, fingers dragging down the wooden beam, until he was swallowed by the water, hands reaching toward the sky. The roof began to come apart, splintering. The roar of the water was deafening, the motion disoriented him. Marlon saw a cow swept into the current beside them, eyes bulging, the mast of a ship thrust upward from the curl of a wave. He prayed, mumbled, shouted, and took in mouthfuls of bitter water. He was alone now, legs dragging, swept along by the river. His nose stung, and his hands were raw and cut open from clinging to slate shingles. The water tossed him against a small building, a tide mill. He came to consciousness in the woods of an old plantation, belly down on a sandy trail near the peach orchard, a stream of blood dripping from his broken nose. He vomited a great deal of water and drew himself, shaking, to his knees. He stayed like that for a while, wishing himself dead, kneeling, shouldering an enormous emptiness that broke, for just a moment, into peace. The birds were calling. The eye of the storm was upon them. He could feel the pounding of the water and the churning of the earth underneath the places where his body touched the ground. He sensed movement in the bushes and remained still. He breathed slowly through his mouth, through his pain. A small white doe stood alone in the path, her ebony hooves impossibly perfect. They locked eyes. It was the longest second of his life. 2 years later, he purchased the abandoned plantation and christened it Stillwood, even though the fruit trees were salt-burned, the oaks undermined and heart-shaken. His new wife, Bettina, a curious woman with pale hair and light eyes, slept under a tent of gauze to avoid insects and spent her days cultivating camellias, placing japonica cuttings in the dappled shade. 1954. Skip Spangler stood in the grove of overgrown peach trees, where she could look down the sloping lawns toward the dark Ashley River and dilapidated family mansion. She pressed her thumb into the soft skin of a rotten peach as a storm gathered on the horizon. Heat lightning lit the cumulus clouds from within. She liked bad weather, dramatic weather, the kind you could watch unfold like a movie, the kind that made you feel small and ridiculous compared to the wind and angry water. As a child, she used to grab piles of jasmine blossoms and throw them into the air, pretending it was snow, which she didn't see until she was 20. She could remember the silken, wet petals in her fists, then white confetti against a blinding blue sky. Those were days where she could sense another world outside of Stillwood, but couldn't reach it, except through the books in her father's library. She'd read about a storm in New England in the early 1800s where fences, rooftops, and cattle horns glowed blue with static electricity, your own fingers, she imagined, glowing. Skip had waited most of her life for a storm like this to come to Stillwood, something savage and biblical, redemptive. She wasn't much of a believer, but thought of Psalms. Preacher Noble, long dead, once said that the Lord could lift high the waves and still the storm to a whisper, and all the wicked would shut their mouths. Preacher Noble also said Skip talked too much. Not as much as you drink, she'd replied, and her mother had slapped her for her wicked mouth. Hard. The sting of her mother's hand made her nervous and alive. Plus, she'd always known herself to have a streak of wickedness. She figured she deserved a little wrath when it came her way. She tucked a strand of chin-length hair behind her ear, prematurely gray. White caps formed on the river. She watched the shutters clap against the siding of the old house. She was the last of a line of women born at Stillwood. Time had reduced the others to faded portraits and penciled lines in the brittle vellum pages of the family Bible. Born, died. Skip was not sentimental like the women before her. She was tired of lugging the past around. She spent most of the year far north, living in a cabin surrounded by a grove of silver maples near Maine's Saco River. She managed a rarely visited wildlife sanctuary, a floodplain forest filled with ferns and songbirds in summer. She was ready to be free of her family home, but didn't sell it for fear that someone would renovate it, strengthen its foundation, and open it to the public. Put a woman in a hoop skirt out front talking about how things used to be. For now, Stillwood's manor sagged on the knoll 3 miles south of where the ferry used to run over a narrow bend of the river. You could drive a horse down the ancient rutted roads that paralleled the Ashley River, but the farm was vacant, the pastures overgrown, the peaches left to rot on the ground. The air smelled of soil and sulfur. The water flowed from the great cypress swamp to the city, past the sloping lawns of Old Plantation. Cattle lowed in the distance, ankle deep in the cool marsh. Trains whistled. The faint lights of Charleston burned in the night, brighter every year. People wrote to Skip, requesting to get married on the banks of the river by the old plantation. She turned them away. Stop being crazy, she told them. Who wants to shuck oysters and dance at a mosquito-drenched place like this, where so many humans suffered? She intended to let the place rot. She'd rather give it to the birds than the brides. The Preservation Society sent an urgent letter every month. Save Stillwood before it's too late. In an op-ed in the Courier, they claimed that she, Skip Spangler, was erasing history, a landmark that belonged to the public. A fire engulfed an outbuilding 5 years before, and the president of the society accused her of starting it. I only wish I had the courage, she wrote him, against her lawyer's advice. Skip looked to the lavender sky, wondering if this could be the storm to do the job. Stillwood was a stubborn house, proving its mettle against hurricanes and termites decade after decade. Rain rusted the eternal tin roof. The porch sagged but could still bear weight. The marble statue had lost one arm, but rose from the center of an empty pool. Skip, like her mother and grandmother, was born in the upstairs bedroom. Her mother's siblings, pronounced dead at birth, were buried underneath the magenta Camellia japonica brought to America by French botanist André Michaud in 1780 and cultivated by the first glass matriarch. If Skip was sentimental about anything, it was the ancient camellias, crepe myrtles, live oaks, tea olives, the heron rookery, the shade of the forest, the sun on the river, the old female alligator with a wallow hole by the forgotten rice field, the buzzards that circled her den, looking to clean the last of her kills. That alligator must be 50 years old by now, Skip figured. Did she also spend her later years wondering what life would have been like on a different river? Skip's mother and grandmother had been proud to hail from this place, to live in this house. Remember, they said, it's best to go a little hungry, never keep score, and hold Christ close to your heart. Yellow jackets and ants were feeding on the bruised peaches by Skip's feet. The wind picked up, and the rain began. Practice the art of polite conversation, Skip thought, throwing her peach onto the ground, and know that a woman can die of thirst beside the ocean. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Megan. I really appreciate that. I'm so glad actually that you read from a novella, because Megan was here a few years ago in person. Of course, we loved her work and her generosity so much. That's why we were having her back. I remember when you were here last time, you said you were at work on a novel.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that you're having another collection come out, but there's a novella in it. So I was kind of curious about, maybe you can talk to us about the genre difference and how you approach the novel, or how you see the novella even fitting into the collection.
Sure. I had a mentor who's also on this call who published a novella alongside some stories, so I knew that it was possible. This was intended to be a full-scale novel, but I am a short form writer, I think. I love potency. And I teach a class at Middlebury on novellas, and I'm just interested in what potency can do. Justin Torres, when he wrote We the Animals, which I think is such a gorgeous novella or novel, I mean, it's really sort of an arbitrary distinction to me in some ways. He wrote about the prose that he wanted it to feel like spooning orange juice concentrate into your mouth. And I love that as an
Ooh.
artistic. Isn't that great? I know I'm always jealous of anything he says or writes, but
Wow.
yeah, but I love that idea. And I don't think meaning or depth is lost when we concentrate literary work. And I've sort of started to accept that I may play to my strengths. I mean, that may just be who I am and what I do.
Well, a similar question for you, Amy, because you, I mean, we're honored to have you because you're like the master of the short form. And, even I'm just reading from your collected works, which came out a few years ago. And it was said that your work was especially influenced by poetry. I guess another distinction. I'm just kind of curious about how you see the short story working in terms of compaction and compression. And you're often considered like a minimalist writer. Do you still hold that to be true, or do you think your work has changed over time?
Well, that was a term that was thrown around a lot in the 80s, I guess, maybe the 80s. And none of us who were referred to as minimalists cared for it.
Yeah.
What I preferred was what Raymond Carver said, precisionist. Precisionist, he felt, was a more accurate term. Minimalism sounded like there was nothing there. There's hardly anything there. That really didn't seem accurate to any of us. So I like that. And I have a lot of interest in, well, for a while, but more and more in writing in fragments. There are so many people doing it. I can't remember, Megan, do you have some in this book, or I can't even think right now.
I can't even think right now either, but
not in this book, not in this book, but it's how I wrote 2 novellas. I couldn't have done it otherwise, but there's so many interesting ones out recently and about to come out. Sarah Manguso, poet, memoirist, and first novelist now. First novel coming out any minute, or I think it already came out in February. Very Cold People in fragments that work really well. Patricia Lockwood's also first novel, I think, last year. Nobody's talking about this. Fragments, done extremely smartly. Going back years, I always reread Maggie Nelson's Bluets and have taught it over and over. It has so much to offer still. I think one critic called that book 234 prose poems. Her fragments do work as prose poems. There's just so many, going back to, like, I guess you could also call Joan Didion's Play It As It Lays, done in short vignettes. Catherine Scanlon is a writer who I find really interesting, and she's got a very short book about a female race track worker coming out in vignettes, and that's coming soon. I mean, there's so many that are done so well, and there's such range there. And I find that working that in that associative way, it is more for me like the way memory works. So I trust it. When I'm working that way, I tend to trust it. When I'm reading it, I tend to trust it. I seem to have wandered off from your question a bit again.
No, I think, well, we have a question in the Q&A actually that kind of is speaking a little bit to this issue. And it's directed towards Amy. Thinking about your stories always feel like poetry. it says. It says the best words in the best order. Do you have any tips so that a starting writer can make every word sound living, like your words of an echo? So I think it's thinking about this idea of lyricism and language and how you, I guess poetry as an influence as well.
Can I just point out, I wanted to point out for Megan, what you just read. I can't even describe what happens to me when I hear something like when you have the sentence that she preferred birds to brides, and what you did with birds and brides. It just, that's why I read. I love that, you know, and it pains me that maybe some people don't land on that in as large a way as I do, and a lot of other readers do. It's just, you know, that's what I'm looking for.
You prescribed poetry to me when I was your student. So Amy was, I think, one of the only fiction writers who would regularly kind of ask us to read several volumes of poetry every month. And Strike Sparks, who wrote
Dean Young or Sharon Olds.
Yeah, Sharon Olds.
Both have a sparks or strike, the word strike in a title. Strike Sparks, Sharon, yeah.
But I remember those felt like entire worlds in poems to me. So, you know, just to, you know, speak to that question, that was one of the volumes of poetry that you asked me to read. And I found its potency, its intensity, its narrative, I felt floored. Like I would have to take, you know, I would have to pause between her poems.
Oh, me too. Me too. And there's, I mean, isn't one of the tests, the great tests, how many times you can reread something, whether it's not even a whole book, but even a single story or a single poem, and still have it knock you over backwards. Those are the sentences, the lines that kind of, you know, set a course for another writer, I think. And Sharon Olds, my God, how many of her lines have done that for me? Whoa.
I also teach Bluettes, so I was nodding along.
Oh, you do? Oh.
I do, because I always know it's going to land on students in a profound way in terms of what's possible in a short form. So I just wholeheartedly agree with that suggestion too.
Oh, I didn't know that, but that's cool. That's cool.
And I'll say the same thank you to actually Megan, who you're the one who, when you came here last time, mentioned Justin Torres's book, who I was unfamiliar with, and I read it. And it is a great hybrid of fiction and poetry. I teach it in both those classes. And then we invited him the next year, and he was a joy as a person, but his work really resonates because of the language. We have another question in the Q&A here. It says, has being a writer changed the way that you read? Or can you still just read for the pleasure as a reader? Or are you always a writer when you're reading, maybe? Megan, would you like to speak to that question?
Sure. I found that I try to read what feeds me in the moment. And I'm a really sensitive person, so I have a hard time sometimes reading novels that are going to, or any kind of material that's going to take me down too low in any given point. Sometimes I'm looking for solace, sometimes I'm looking for information, but on my bedside, I've noticed in the last few years, I tend to have nonfiction and poetry by my bedside. Sometimes reading fiction, my brain starts thinking too much about how it's working, and so I really have come to appreciate moments where I can read something and I fall into the so-called continual dream and don't think about how it's working. But I will say, I think I'm predominantly a nonfiction and poetry reader and a fiction writer. Maybe I shouldn't admit that, but I read the other team.
and I would say on my bedside, recently there was a book that I thought Megan must know about this guy. I'm coming late to his work, Doug Peacock. And he has a book that just came out that's being touted as an environmental memoir. It's called Was It Worth It? And this is a fellow who's one of these hard-barked guys who's lived out in the natural world in ways that most of us have not. I mean, is a constant. And for example, he's been very active in trying to save the grizzlies in Yellowstone, for example, and many, many, many other things. But one of the moments that stood out for me was, and he doesn't say this in a bragging way, but you realize you're reading that the day he walked 25 miles across the desert in Arizona to reach a friend's house, the day after he'd been bitten by a rattlesnake. And that was possible because he very calmly realized it was a dry bite. So he was bitten by a rattler, but did not get the venom. I didn't know this was possible. He has experienced it, but it's quite something. Who is it? I'm looking in the chat. Ooh, like Chris McCandless. Who is that?
From Into the Wild, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Going out there,
Yeah.
living in nature.
But and I wanted to ask if there's time. I mean, and I think there's time. I mean, would love to hear you describe a little bit, Megan, the environmental writing conferences that you've put together and that you're still part of.
Thanks for that. We've been sidelined for 2 years. So ideally, I mean, it seems like we've done a virtual conference, but I think we're going to be back in person this summer. And even though I'm really introverted, it's really the first time I've been looking forward to being with a big group of people after so long. I think the thing I love about that work is helping scientists step more into first person work so that what I'm averse to, I think, are hot takes or the climate change makes me sad in a non-specific way, and I think, obviously that's a really organic feeling. Or, after reading The Slush Pile for so long, I see a lot of like Thoreau, and I think there's just a real opportunity to make environmental writing crack it open. Who gets to be an environmental writer? What's considered environmental writing? It's just a much more urgent and open conversation and more ways to plug in. And I think that's the thing I'm most passionate about in that conference is how do we encourage those who have substantive expertise to have the mic and write an engaging piece. I've worked with a lot of lawyers and scientists and their training is against first person and against emotion. And so I love being the person who gets to be permissive and say, no, bring it. And here's how. And then, helping people write fiction, but it doesn't feel as walled off to me anymore. Environmental writing, environmental fiction. It just feels like that's one of the things I tried to do in my book is not make the environmental degradation the story, but make it the pressurized, realistic background that's kind of acting on all of it.
Exactly, and you do it beautifully. As a completely unbiased reader, I highly recommend this book.
Maybe we can just end with this question. You talked a little bit about humanizing the journalism, and Amy, you were talking about memoir. How do you approach nonfiction versus fiction, or do you make a distinction as much anymore? Is that kind of an arbitrary distinction?
No, there's a distinction. I mean, you have some responsibilities if you're writing memoir. I'm not writing now, so I don't know what will come next, but in terms of reading, poetry and memoir, are kind of neck and neck with stories. Obviously, stories. I'll read stories before I'll read a novel, usually. Still love novellas. I didn't know, Megan, you were teaching a class in the novella. I would love it. I wish I could take it.
You could obviously teach it a million times over, but it's fun to watch students just, I feel like a novella apologist or like somebody who's trying to say, look, this is a gorgeous form with so many possibilities. So we read Dennis Johnson's Train Dreams, and that's one that is pretty vivid for people. It seems to have a big impact. But yeah, always going to vote for potency and non-bloat.
Non-bloat. Non-bloat, yes. Boy, there's a word, you bet. Good goals.
It looks like we're at the end of the hour, and I would like to thank both you guys. It's been such an honor to have you here for the first time or back again, and spending the hour sharing your work with us. It's just been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks,
Thank you, Mark.
Megan.
Thank you, everyone who's still on the line.
Yeah, we can't see you, but thank you.
Awesome. And their works are available. Obviously, Megan's book will be forthcoming in a few weeks, but we at DMAC have been buying up their books and giving them out for free, or at least, well, on our tab. So if you are interested in getting a copy of their work, just contact me, and we'd be happy to lend you a copy. Yeah, just get in contact with me, and we'd be happy to share. Otherwise, keep an eye on the schedule. We have 2 poets coming next week. We have Ayla Limon and Maggie Smith joining us to read their work. And so hopefully you will be back next week. Again, thank you so much, guys, for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. Bye, guys. Thanks.
Bye.